Hello to you. We're live in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv at the end of an extraordinary day here in the Middle East. We've witnessed the release of all the surviving hostages held by Hamas and abducted in the October the 7th attacks in 2023. And Israel has handed over hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and detainees under phase 1 of Donald Trump's peace plan. Well, the day began with euphoric scenes here in the plaza just over there, as images of the 20 living hostages were beamed onto a giant screen, some having been reunited with their families. Hamas was due to return the bodies of another 28 hostages who died. So far, just 4 have been brought back, much to the anger of their relatives. Israel then began releasing almost 2,000 prisoners and detainees, met by cheering crowds in the occupied West Bank and in Gaza. And as all this was happening, Donald Trump flew in to a rapturous reception and standing ovations in Israel's parliament, the Knesset, where he hailed the historic dawn of a new Middle East. Well, it's been a day of emotion and relief, but there are so many obstacles still to overcome if a lasting peace is to be achieved. In a moment, we'll hear from Tom Bateman, who flew in with Donald Trump and then went on to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, where the ceasefire deal was officially signed off with other world leaders. And we'll have a report from Lucy Williamson, who's been with Palestinians in Ramallah in the West Bank. But first, here's Jeremy Bowen on a dramatic day for the Middle East.
First light in Tel Aviv on the day that 2 years of waiting ended for Israel. On the beach, a tribute to Donald Trump, hoping maybe he'd see it as he flew in. Hostage Square in the city centre has been the heartbeat of 2 years of campaigning for the release of the hostages. For the people here, the last few hours of a long wait went by very slowly, and then it started. In Gaza City, Elkanah Bobot was given a phone to call home. His family could see the Hamas guard right behind him. Outside, Hamas was back on the streets to clear the way for the International Red Cross to take the hostages on the first stage of their journey back to Israel. Hamas took the hostages to use as a weapon against Israel, but they had become a liability. Their presence did not stop Israel's offensive, and huge destruction and death in Gaza. The war could not end until the hostages were free. 50 miles north in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square, the tension broke. The news that they were on the move out of Gaza and away from Hamas was enough. It was a moment of release for the people waiting and watching, as well as for the men being driven out of Gaza. The crowd followed every moment on a big screen. The first 7 hostages are now out. There's a real sense of expectation. They're expecting the next batch in about an hour. The International Red Cross handed the hostages over to the Israeli military, the IDF. Lishai Miran was watching on TV. It was her husband Omri, a 48-year-old father of 2 from Kibbutz Nachal Oz. Then the family and friends of Matan Angrest, a 22-year-old soldier, saw him. Hostages previously released say he was badly hurt by Hamas during violent interrogations. And then they were back in Israel. 25-year-old Matan Zangauka was reunited with his mother, Einav. My hero, she said. A quarter of the 400 residents of their kibbutz near Oz were killed or taken hostage on the 7th of October. 23-year-old Bar Cooperstein's mother, Julie, last saw him before he went to work as a security guard at the Nova Music Festival, where almost 400 people were killed. His father, Tal, had to stand up on this day of all days. In Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, they were watching everything, glued to the big screen, and some wondering why there was no deal last year. Gil Dickman blames Israel's prime minister.
My cousin Kamel Gat was kidnapped on October 7th, and she was murdered after 328 days in captivity. She was kept in a tunnel, and her captors just shot her when the IDF was approaching because they thought they were trying to release her. And she was murdered alongside 5 other hostages in Rafah at the end of August 2024.
I've seen Netanyahu's speeches. He says, my strategy worked.
Yeah, he always said that, right? He always says that his strategy works. Even when hostages are killed, he's saying his strategy works. Okay, 42 hostages were murdered in captivity. Does that mean that his strategy worked? I don't think so.
Aviva Siegel was a hostage released in the first ceasefire 2 months into the war. When she was freed, Hamas kept her husband Keith.
I'm exploding with joy for the families, for them to get out. I was there, I touched death, and I went through the worst time that any person should ever go through for 51 days. Keith, my husband, was there for 484 days, hidden, starved. He came back like a skeleton. He wasn't treated like a person.
You feeling good about the future, the day after, once, this is a joyful day, but what happens next?
Keith and I are going to start to live. We're going to start smiling. We're going to start enjoying life because the last 2 years we haven't.
Palestinian prisoners were released by Israel as soon as its hostages were safe. These came back to Khan Yunis in Gaza. Palestinians see prisoners of the Israelis as national heroes, and they were given a hero's welcome. But their reception also showed relief that it is safe now to gather in big crowds in Gaza, and hope, as strong as people feel in Israel, that the ceasefire can become permanent. Some of the former prisoners started their family reunions before they'd even got off the bus. And while all that was happening, Donald Trump, who's become a national hero for Israelis, landed in Tel Aviv. All smiles now, but just over a month ago, Trump lost patience with Benjamin Netanyahu after he ordered a strike on Qatar, one of America's key Arab allies. The missiles missed their target, the Hamas leadership, but after that, Trump decided it was no longer in America's interests to back Netanyahu's determination to fight on. They drove together in the American presidential limousine to Israel's parliament in Jerusalem. This was a lap of honor for Donald Trump, for the hostage deal and ceasefire a genuine diplomatic triumph.
Donald Trump is the greatest friend that the state of Israel has ever had in the White House.
He had a different message for allies. The UK is one who condemned Israel and recognized Palestine as evidence of Israeli war crimes in Gaza accumulated.
More and more governments bought into Hamas's false propaganda. More and more governments succumbed to anti-Semitic mobs in their own countries. They just turned on Israel.
2 MPs were ejected when they interrupted Trump to demand a Palestinian state. A vague aspiration for one is in the Gaza deal. He didn't mention it as he reassured Israelis.
Gaza will be immediately demilitarized, that Hamas will be disarmed, and Israel's security will no longer be threatened in any way, shape, or form.
But that job has barely started. Donald Trump moved quickly on to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for a whistle-stop peace summit. The Gaza deal was a joint effort. Many of the leaders who came to Sharm had vital roles. But it is a ceasefire, an exchange of hostages for prisoners. It is not peace. Hours after Israel's hostages were reunited with their families, a few hundred people stayed in their square in Tel Aviv. The yellow ribbons, symbols of return, were still there, and the people seemed reluctant to let go of a momentous day. There was hope here today in this square, and joy, and the same for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank who are fed up with war. But this is a conflict with very deep roots, and relief will collide with reality. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
And we'll get a little bit more from Jeremy a bit later. But as we've been hearing, in exchange for the hostages, Israel is releasing around 250 Palestinian prisoners and more than 1,700 detainees. Now, the groups were transferred by bus to the occupied West Bank and to Gaza. The BBC, along with other international journalists, isn't allowed to report from the territory. We're not allowed to see for ourselves what's going on. Lucy Williamson has spent the day in Ramallah in the West Bank, and a warning: her report contains some distressing images.
They arrived hours early and counted the minutes, not yet daring to hope. The speed of this deal meant the list of releases was still being finalised last night. Emotions uncertain, families kept their eyes fixed on the road. Aida was waiting for her brother, Murad Abu Rob, in prison for the past 20 years.
I don't know how he looks like yesterday. I went shopping for him. He's a big guy. He used to be a big guy, you know. So I tried to figure out what size should I take for him, you know. I don't know if it's gonna fit him today or not. I don't know.
88 prisoners were released back to the West Bank and East Jerusalem today, boarding the bus as prisoners, emerging as brothers, fathers and sons. Israel insisted there be no celebrations or victory parades, but for these last few meters of their journey, they were carried as national heroes, eyes wet, before collapsing into a familiar pair of arms. This is the reward Hamas is offering Palestinians in return for 2 years of war. The unspoken question, here and in Gaza, was it worth the price?
The release of these prisoners marks the end of the first phase of this deal. Beyond this, little is agreed. Details, timetables, deep ideological disputes all have to be resolved.
But Murad wasn't among them. Aida, inconsolable. We discovered Murad's name, once slated for release, had been moved to a list of deportees.
They kidnapped my brother. They kidnapped them.
Our colleagues in Gaza looked for Murad among the 1,700 faces released there today. It's still not clear where he is. Many of those freed in Khan Yunis have been held without trial since early in the war. Hanging from the window as his bus inched through cheering crowds, Ibrahim Sahlul shared his delight.
I can't believe I'm coming home. This is the first time I've seen the sky without a fence. I salute all the fighters.
All the detainees were taken to Nasser Hospital for medical checks. Mohammed al-Bakri, in prison since March last year, accused Israel of torture.
They were the worst experience of our lives. We were subjected to burning, beating, suppressions and breaking of bones. Our bodies bear the marks.
This prisoner exchange has also showcased Hamas's continued control in Gaza. Today, footage emerged of Hamas fighters appearing to execute members of a rival armed clan. The 7th of October attacks, planned by a man Israel freed in a previous exchange, began this war. Ending it means Hamas now giving up its power and weapons. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Ramallah.
The view there from the other side of the divide. Well, here in Israel, what a day it's been for those people who gathered here in Hostages Square. It's a tad quieter now than it was earlier today, and emotions have been running high throughout the day. The events of October the 7th, they traumatized the whole nation. So how do Israelis see today's developments, and will the hostages return bring the closure so many want and need?
A message from the heavens. In Hostages Square, all eyes train skywards. Military helicopters ferrying returning hostages to local hospitals give the former captives a bird's eye view of the love of a nation.
There's another one. Yeah, they're going round.
Zoe Pelled's from Canada, visiting her family. and had to be here.
A lot of people waited such a long time for it, and to have it finally all be transpiring right now, it's very surreal, but it also makes me very happy.
This is a moment of relief, not just for the hostages and their families, but for all of Israel. And the moment the images of the freed captives reunited with their families appeared on a giant screen, a day of high emotion hit a new level.
חיים שלה, חיים שלנו. איזה רגע. יותר מזה אנחנו באמת לא צריכים. רק את זה. ככה נראה האושר.
You've been coming here so regularly.
Svika Miller has been visiting Hostages Square every Saturday for 2 years.
Do you believe today is the beginning of something?
I'm very proud after 2 years, today again to be proud of being Israeli. The most important thing now is to make peace with the Palestinians, not only Arab countries. I think one of the reasons they attacked us is that we didn't think about Palestinians these last almost 20 years.
Peace needs, demands an accommodation between the Israelis and Palestinians. Is that moment finally here?
Well, it's been a busy day for Donald Trump here in the Middle East. He spent a few hours in Israel addressing the parliament before heading to Egypt to meet world leaders in Sharm el-Sheikh. Tom Bateman traveled with the president.
As we head to Israel, I get a few questions to the president. Are you confident that the ceasefire is going to hold?
I think so. I think it's going to hold.
What will Gaza look like a year from now?
The International Stabilization Force, as part of the...
strong force.
As we reached Tel Aviv, the plane took a turn to fly by the beach. Air Force One dipping a wing so we could get a view of a sign thanking Trump.
Well, we're now getting off Air Force One, just ahead of the president, here in Tel Aviv. And this happening almost simultaneously with the release of hostages from Gaza. And all of this, of course, a big part of why Mr. Trump wants to mark this moment and also take the credit for it.
Then we're in the motorcade, us press in the vans at the back, hurtling to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset.
Well, that's the moment Donald Trump wanted, a standing ovation from the Israeli parliament. Well, the president now making his way up the steps after having declared a new dawn for the Middle East. And we head now to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt.
Then this for the president, who loves to see military power. Egyptian F-16s escort us into this sun-soaked tourist resort. President Trump has clearly wanted to celebrate every minute of this. He sees it as legacy-defining.
Well, this room is filling with world leaders one by one. They've been coming in through the door. On the stage is the presidential seal and the podium for Mr. Trump. Well, this event has been very much about President Trump declaring a triumph, a moment in history after 3,000 years. But the fact remains that some of the hardest negotiations still haven't happened yet. They are to come in a second phase, and this is really the start of that process, not the end of it.
Tom Bateman, BBC News, Sharm el-Sheikh.
Well, today's summit in Egypt brought together international leaders to discuss the next phase of the peace process. Alongside Sir Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and others was King Abdullah of Jordan. Now, his country borders Israel and the occupied West Bank. And ahead of today's summit, the king sat down with Fergal Keane and warned that the Middle East is doomed unless there's a peace process leading to a Palestinian state alongside Israel.
And so these guys are the descendants of those who...
King Abdullah is the longest-serving leader in the region, sharing a border with Israel and with Palestinians making up more than 50% of his country's population.
So, Your Majesty, your chair, yeah.
A lasting peace is a personal and a national imperative.
If we don't solve this problem, we're going to be at it again. So, in my view, two-state solution is the only way forward. If we don't find a future for Israelis and Palestinians and a relationship between the Arab and Muslim world and Israel, we're doomed.
So much is unresolved. The physical recovery, let alone the mental trauma left by war. Who will really run the Gaza Strip in a political landscape devoid of trust?
Do you trust Hamas when they say they accept not being part of the political future?
Well, I don't know them, but those that are working extremely close to them, Qatar and Egypt, feel very, very optimistic that they will abide by that.
Is it possible with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the right-wing coalition in power to have a lasting peace?
From my experiences, no. Most nations, when they look at strategic challenges, look at what is the end game. I believe that this prime minister and his group, their strategic end game is perpetual conflict. By perpetual conflict, they stay in power. But there are those in Israel that believe in inclusion, that want to change the way that this government has gone. And these are the peace builders that I think we can work with once there's an opportunity to do so.
By His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israel's Prime Minister has pledged there'll be no Palestinian state.
In fact, they effectively had a Palestinian state in Gaza. So what did they do with that state? Peace? Coexistence? No. They attacked us time and time again.
The king says it's vital President Trump stays engaged with the process.
I think it's important that him and his administration do, because the devil is in the details. So we are dealing with phase one at the moment. Where it could go awry would be as we get into the technical issues of phase two. And then is that an opportunity for mischief? I believe the president understands this, and it's the responsibility to all of us in the region to make sure that the president gets us across the finish line.
Why is the two states...
History does not encourage hope, but the king does believe this is a moment of genuine possibility. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Amman.
Let's get a final word from Jeremy, who's with me. There remains some concern from many here in Israel about the failure of Hamas to hand over the remains of all those hostages who died in captivity, and that is causing real anger.
Yeah, a lot of concern, I think, on the Israeli side. They think they were hoping for 28. Up to now, they've had 4, which have been taken to their forensic center for identification, DNA, and so on. Israel Katz, the defense minister, posted on social media, any delay or deliberate avoidance will be considered a gross violation of the agreement and will be responded to accordingly. No, it's not really clear what he's actually referring to there, but it's definitely a sign of irritation. I think it's also a sign of the fact of the huge lack of trust, as you'd expect, on both sides, and the urgency of trying to really get to grip with not just that, but the bigger issues that have to be looked at. Things like the governance of Gaza, security in Gaza. What about Hamas's weapons? There's video on social media of them executing people in the street today, people from the rival clan, who they claimed were collaborating with Israel. So there are lots of things shaking there, which I think people have to look at very closely. And one thing that might stabilize it is getting that deal properly done, negotiated. Not yet. It hasn't been done.
Indeed. All right. Jeremy Bowen, our international editor there.